Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 29th. Today in garden history, we celebrate the American physician and botanist William Baldwin, who was born on this day, March 29th in 1779. William is remembered as one of the first botanists to explore Georgia and Florida, as well as parts of Latin America and the West Indies. William was brought on as the botanist for Stephen Long's 1819 expedition to find the headwaters of the Missouri River. But 6 months later, William Baldwin died at Franklin, Missouri, at the young age of 40, and he was buried on the banks of the Missouri River. Today we know about William mostly from his dear friend, the botanist William Darlington, who wrote his biography. The two men became close after William nursed Darlington back to health after an illness when the two men were young. Darlington reflected on his friend's death decades later when he wrote these words about William Baldwin. His gentle spirit forsook its frail tenement in a region far remote from his anxious family, and the wildflowers of the West for more than 20 years have been blooming on his lonely grave. Now, a year after William Darlington wrote those words, he learned from a colleague that the floodwaters of the Missouri had washed away William Baldwin's grave. Today, Baldwin's milkwort, or Polygala baldwinii, is named in honor of William Baldwin, and it's one of only a handful of white milkworts found in Florida. And today we celebrate the birthday of Ronald Stewart Thomas. He was always published as R.S. Thomas. He was a Welsh poet and Anglican priest, and he was born on this day, March 29th in 1913. Here's an excerpt from his excellent poem from 1963 called The Garden. It is a gesture against the wild, the ungovernable sea of grass, a place to remember love in, to be lonely for a while. And it was on this day, March 29th, in 1969, that work was finished on a kimono-inspired garden in Japan. The garden was called Yûrin no Niwa, and it's located in Kyoto. Now, this garden was originally designed to accompany the building for the Association of Kimono Manufacturers. The famous garden designer Mirei Shigemori designed the garden, which was celebrated in a ceremony the day after work was completed. But 30 years later, in 1999, the area was redeveloped and the building was set to be demolished. But what would happen to the garden? Well, Iwamoto Toshio was a student of Shigemori's, and he decided to rescue the garden so that it could be relocated to a new home. And so he scooped up the garden and basically held it in a storage facility until he could find a new space for it. Can you believe that? Well, when Shigemori's hometown was building a new town hall, the garden found its new home. And so over 80 truckloads of rock and stone were painstakingly brought to the new site, where they were reassembled like a puzzle to make the second incarnation of the Yûrin no Niwa garden. Now, this second garden ended up being just a little bit bigger, but the garden features a shallow kimono-shaped pond, and then water brings out the colors of the red and blue stones that make the stripes of the noshi bundle on the kimono. Now, the name of the garden is fascinating. It was actually a blending of two names. It honors the name of the man who developed the silk dyeing process for kimonos and the name of the painter who inspired the kimono designs. And so that's how we get Yûrin no Niwa. And finally, it was on this day, March 29th in 2021, just last year, that the British public was getting ready to enjoy the end to their COVID lockdown. Out and Out shared an article on this day called 5 Things to Do to Get Your Garden Ready for March 29th, 2021. The tips included smarten up your lawn. They said to give your lawn a good raking and get rid of fallen debris, shake out some grass seed over patchy areas. The second tip was wash away winter. Get everything scrubbed up, get your patio and decking areas looking good, do a jet wash, blast away winter deposits. The third tip was organize your seating. Place garden dining furniture in a big area so there's space to walk all around and get people comfortably seated. And then if you had garden sofas or lounge sets, lay them out so you can comfortably chat with your guests. The fourth tip was spring planting. They said if you didn't get around to planting spring bulbs last year, you can add instant color by picking up plants at the garden center like camellia, Japanese quince, and forsythia. And then finally, the fifth tip was finishing touches. Here they said, for alfresco dining, set the table with colorful crockery and beakers, which will take you through to barbecue season. Invest in a parasol for the sun. For cooler days and evenings, consider adding a patio heater and some chunky throws or blankets. And then don't forget solar lights. And that way you can keep the conversation going after nightfall. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Homegrown Tea by Cassie Liversidge. I have been waiting to share this book with you. The subtitle is An Illustrated Guide to Planting, Harvesting, and Blending Teas and Tisanes. Now, if you don't know what a tisane is, it's an infusion. You take dried herbs and you infuse them into liquids, and then you have a beverage that you can drink just to enjoy or hope to get some medicinal benefits from it. So a sample tisane might be made with juniper berries or white peppercorns with grapefruit and orange peels. That's a great little drink. Juniper is wonderful and is a common ingredient in a tisane. Now, one of the things that I want to say about Cassie's book right off the bat is that it's absolutely beautiful. This is a St. Martin's Griffin book. There are so many beautiful photos, and that's why I love books like this that are illustrated guides, because sometimes when you're talking about a new topic, you're venturing into a new area of gardening, you need lots of photos to find your way and to serve as inspiration for you. Now, Cassie is a huge tea fan, and she sees the garden through the lens of tea. When she sees a garden, she sees a living tea cupboard, because there's all kinds of plant material that you can harvest to make your own teas and, of course, tisanes. As Cassie says in her introduction, Homegrown Tea is a gardening book for tea lovers. It explains how to grow a large variety of plants from which you can make your own teas and tisanes. And your garden, your balcony, or even your windowsill could become your tea cupboard. Now, one of the other things that I love about how Cassie approaches this is she also shares some of the history of tea and how some of these ingredients have been used over the years. Her sample drinks include plants like rose hips, mint, sage, hibiscus, and lavender, as well as plants like chicory or angelica, apple geranium, and lemon verbena. Now, one other thing that I want to tell you about Cassie is that she's a garden girl. She grew up on her parents' plant nursery, so she knows about plants. It's in her DNA, and that's how she is so thoughtful and so knowledgeable about plants in the garden and how you can incorporate them into teas. And by the way, her debut book was called Grow Your Own Pasta Sauce, and that book is excellent as well. But if you are a tea lover, you've got to get this book. And if you have a friend that loves tea, this would make an excellent gift, or even just a wonderful hostess gift. Wouldn't it be great to give this book to a hostess of a summer party, along with a few tea bags of your own concoctions? I love that. All right, this book is 288 pages of tea in all its glory, fresh from your garden. You can get a copy of Homegrown Tea by Cassie Liversidge and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $16. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark that features a 26-year-old ethnobotanist named Richard Evans Schultes. It was on this day, March 29th in 1942, that Richard arrived at the Kofan village of El Coneo, where he was welcomed by a shaman. Richard had just finished his PhD at Harvard, and his mission was to find indigenous arrow poisons that were used in the Amazon rainforest. Now, the goal was to see if the poisons could be used as muscle relaxants in surgical procedures. And this trip set Richard down a path of meeting with shamans and discovering the plants they used medicinally and in their holy traditions. As for Richard, he gleaned so much on this trip. He learned about special leaves that were heated with smoke and then laid on the forehead to relieve headaches. He learned about orchid bulbs that were chewed for energy on long trips, shamrock leaves that were gargled for throat pain, pepper plant poultices applied to insect bites, and the leaves of a white orchid that could be packed around a sore tooth or eaten mashed with sugar to heal a broken heart. The list goes on and on. Overall, Richard's trip was a resounding success, and it seemed charmed right from the start. On his first day in Bogota, Richard discovered a new orchid. He pressed it in between the pages of his passport, and it was later named for him, Pachyphyllum schultzii. Richard later reflected on the opportunity, and he wrote these words: I had just earned my PhD at Harvard, and I had been offered 2 jobs. One was as a biology master at a private school in New England, and the other was a 10-month grant to go to the Amazon region to identify the plants employed in the many kinds of curare, or poisons, that the Indians use for hunting. I decided on the Amazon, which is fortunate because otherwise I would probably still be a biology teacher. Well, that's it for today's show. Just remember that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website, or more in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.